Well, hey everybody. Here I am. I've got my wonderful sister and brother-in-law, Marissa and Larry, and then my parents down below me, Dennis and Sue, and then also in the room with me over here is my wife, Rachel, and our little one, Selah. She's not going to say anything. But yeah, so for this sermon, I chose Easter, and I selected Mark 16, and so it's the empty tomb story passage. I'm just picturing my own church service, like an Easter service at my church. My church is a non-denominational church, evangelical, probably 500 or so at the main service, maybe a little less. Um, but yeah, so I'm gonna put myself on speaker view here. All right. That's really funny because I'm on speaker view, but I just see my sister right now. That's uh, kind of awkward. All right, here we go. Well, Easter is one of my favorite holidays. It's a season so packed full of meaning. And there's a familiarity to the season. The stories, the scenes and cycles of life and death just carries me along. And yet this familiarity can also complicate my own encounters with God as I nod through the repeating themes, which can begin to feel more removed from the realities of life. I hope today we might be able to encounter this story with a fresh vision for what God is still doing through these familiar events. I think the story actually takes place in the midst of some familiar and harsh realities for the followers of Jesus. Today's story is actually a culmination of what came prior on Good Friday, the day marked with the brutalities of suffering and death. Our story begins in a corrupt world where people have done horrible wrongs to others, and others are being punished for things they didn't even do. A world where the hunger for power fuels human exploitation and oppression. The framework of this story can quickly become dark and gloomy, yet it's also familiar. It's easy to miss what is happening right before our very eyes because it's so familiar. We've seen it before, and we know how the story goes. I think this is the situation of Jesus' own followers. On this very morning, thousands of years ago, after riding the roller coaster of excitement, wonder, and amazement through his ministry and hope, it is the hope that I think is most under attack here. As they watch the source of their hope, this human who was so much more, Jesus, snuffed out through a harrowing turn of events before their very eyes, brutalized and robbed of life, as they watched helpless and traumatized by what happened. Surely it wasn't supposed to happen this way. It was as if this great hope and all the goodness that God had seemed to promise, that hope had been snatched away. And this had to be overwhelming to witness. To see someone so full of life and goodness destroyed. And they are left with nothing but an emptiness. The emptiness of grief and loss, and a harsh reminder that there is something other than God's goodness at work in our world. And only a couple days later now, they have to still be reeling in shock and in pain. A familiar ache of what could have been, or what might have been, but has been eliminated once again by suffering and death. And now their hope lies still in a tomb. It's all too familiar. At the time, Rome routinely crucified people. There were two others crucified even next to Jesus. And like a habit, this was a familiar reminder of Rome's power and their place. As they waited for God to hear them and to respond and to do something to change it. Waiting and waiting, and now waiting yet again. This is the familiarity that I think the disciples taste as we begin our story today. The story in Mark 16. A long and familiar ache that accompanies the painful realities of life in this world as goodness is interrupted again and again with evil, as the joy of life is interrupted by suffering and death. This is the state of things as a group of women who followed Jesus show up to his tomb on Sunday morning out of a pained love and devotion to him. And so, reading from Mark 16. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us?" Which is very large. As they entered the tomb, and when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled back. And as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe and sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look at the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee, and there you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Jesus was crucified on a Friday and laid in the tomb as the Sabbath began. And the Sabbath, this time of rest, lasted until Saturday evening. So the women picked up what was needed for the proper treatment of Jesus' body. But it would have been getting dark. So first thing Sunday morning, I can imagine the twilight of dawn as the sky is beginning to light up. Maybe they're groggy from their sleep. They set out, only to realize along the way that they don't have a way to get into the tomb. Tombs are carved out of rock, like small caves, and could be covered by large stones rolled across the entry. And this was a common practice. In the midst of grieving his death, their devotion to Jesus had brought them to an impassable barrier. This tomb, this rock, standing between them and him, immovable. But this doesn't stop them from going anyway. They don't turn around. They keep going. And I'm glad that they do. It says they looked up to see that the stone had in fact been rolled away. I wonder, had they been looking down as they walked? Was it the posture of a body in sadness that carried them? Or maybe someone trying to make their way in the dim light of the morning? The verb here for looking up is actually used elsewhere in the Gospel of Mark to describe the recovery of sight of blind, as when Jesus was healing people. And so it's an interesting choice of words to use here. And all the shock and sorrow of the past few days, overwhelmed by all the familiarity of it, had they begun to lose sight of something? Had they begun to go blind? Had the hope that they once held been jarred loose from their hands as they were overwhelmed with grief? But now they've begun to look up, and they see something that doesn't make sense. The stone hasn't just been rolled away. There's a young man dressed in white, that is, an angel, sitting at the right side. And this is an odd way to say that for us. But in the ancient world, the right side was full of meaning. It was the position of power and of victory. But this doesn't make sense. This is not what they expected to find. And it isn't Jesus that they see, and he's the reason that they're there. So where is he? Suddenly, this scene isn't familiar at all, and they are understandably alarmed. What is going on? But it sounds like their sight isn't completely restored yet from what has happened. Though Jesus had spoken multiple times to them about how he would die and be raised, because of course he couldn't have meant quite that. I mean, surely it was metaphorical or something. I mean, that's just not how things work. But Jesus could be kind of cryptic sometimes. Maybe Jesus is kind of cryptic sometimes. But like most angels do in Scripture, this one encourages them. Don't be afraid. He knows why they're there, to see Jesus of Nazareth, who he says has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. It's like the angel is saying, look what they tried to do to him. Look where they tried to put him down. But God has raised him up. The wording here is interesting. It's what's called the divine passive. Often we'll say, he has risen, which is true. But the wording in the passage is underscoring that a miracle has taken place, that God has acted to supernaturally raise Jesus from the dead. He didn't arise as in just stand up. He was raised. This isn't a ghost story. This is a formerly dead man being resurrected to new life and walking out of a tomb. This is the reason for the subtle hinting of power and authority by the angel's position. The darkness behind all of the grief, the hopelessness hasn't won. The evil that stays active in our world hasn't been able to keep him down. And now he's not here. They're in the wrong place if they want to see Jesus. But then the angel gives them something to do. Go tell others, specifically, and Peter. You may recall that as Jesus was taken to trial, Peter denied any association with him out of fear of what might happen, even after boldly proclaiming that he would never abandon Jesus. The faithful and bold Peter, now wallowing in his own shame as he grieved the loss of his dear friend. He had betrayed his best friend. Jesus knows. And this messenger dressed in white, well, he wants to make clear that about what exactly has happened. Make sure you tell Peter. This is an invitation to forgiveness. That even in our disobedience, and even in our betrayal, like Peter, on Easter, we are called back again. Forgiveness lies at the foundation of everything that has been taking place in the story. That in our wrongs, God is acting to make things right. And as we have put down or been put down, God is raising up. And ultimately, it is God's actions that will prevail. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. He is going ahead of you. He isn't dead anymore. And even though he might not be here, he hasn't left you behind. This is good news. The familiarity of death has been interrupted. We're invited again to follow Jesus. Despite the pain and confusion, despite our wrongs, like Peter, we are invited to follow. And now Jesus goes ahead of us, which is another way of saying that God is still with us. In the Old Testament, God went ahead of people as he freed them from the bondage of Egypt, leading them through the desert. And now God is doing something similar as we are freed from the bondage of sin and death. He has been raised. He is not here. He invites us to follow, and he goes ahead of us. But if you want to see him, you have to go out there. You can't stay here. You can't remain in the emptiness. You have to get moving to Galilee. Even when it's easy to just stay, to get stuck in the pain, to let the familiarity of it all guide us, because we already know where things are going. And we stop at the entrance of the empty tomb, where we thought we were going to see Jesus, except he's no longer there. Just as he told you, the angel said. Do they believe him? Do we believe him? I think often we get stuck somewhere in between the sorrow and the hope, in between faith and doubt, and we are standing around at the entrance of an empty tomb where we expected to see Jesus, but for some reason he's not there, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to us. I mean, did it really have to happen like this? Why couldn't God have stepped in and just stopped it? Why would God let us all go through it all if he was just going to raise him from the dead? Yet he did, and he said it would happen this way. But death was too familiar for them to see what was right in front of them. But it's time to get moving. It's time to get going, because Jesus awaits us out there. It's time to get going because somewhere Peter is still weeping. It's time to get going because there's a whole world of people that have heard something about Jesus, but lost hope and think that the story is over. It's time to get going because we weren't meant to stand powerless in death's doorway forever, as if it has the final say. That isn't our place. That isn't our home. And Jesus calls us out into new life that will probably be just as confusing, and there's still going to be pain and loss, but Jesus is there, and it isn't over yet. And he's waiting for us to encounter his resurrected life, that it might fill us with goodness and forgiveness and love, with God's very presence and vitality that will one day raise us up, that we might also walk out of our own graves at the renewal of all creation. We've got to get going because God has always intended it to meet us back where it all began. We can't stay here. We've got to head back to Galilee, the place where the disciples first met Jesus and came to follow him. Maybe the place where we first came to meet and follow Jesus. The place where we first came to believe that impossible things can happen in Christ. And the faith that drew us with the crowds who were hungry for more because the God of the universe came to earth as a human being, flesh and blood just like ours. Because God wanted to make things right. And our Creator cares enough to join us in the mess that we've made of the world, or in the mess of our own lives, to show us the way. And it all depends on his forgiveness. But now we have hope, because the tomb is empty. God is making all things new and inviting us to join the fun. And others need to know about it. I find it interesting that the passage in Mark ends here with confusion and fear. The story even tells us specifically that Jesus has been raised, but they haven't seen him yet. They are still overwhelmed, shocked, and afraid. According to one translation, bewildered, as they leave in silence. Bewildered isn't a word that I use a lot, but it seems pretty appropriate here. These women showed up talking, and now they leave in silence. And we know they tell others as they've been instructed, but it doesn't change that something fantastical and confusing has happened. God has interrupted the familiar. God has stirred up their mourning, disrupted the routine, and now waits for them out there. So what will they do? Will they go to meet him? Will they get to see him? I think that's the grand question for us in the story. What will we do? I know that for many of us, this is a familiar story. We know how it ends, and the world doesn't seem all that different despite what happened. So will we remain in the familiarity of death's doorway? Because this is all there's going to be? Will we get stuck in the grief and sorrow of suffering and loss? Will we freeze under the weight of our wrongs? It's time to get going. It's time to look up and let God restore our sight with an empty tomb. Death will not be the end, even as it continues to sting us. And Jesus awaits us out there as we head back to the place of faith where it began. So let's not make the mistake of leaving in silence, but with a loud cheer, because Jesus is alive and he's gone ahead of us, and he can't wait for us to join him.